Hello, fifth graders. Welcome to part 2 of the Beetle project. Just a reminder that this week in part 2, you are actually going to be working to sculpt your beetles, and I'm so excited about it. You're actually going to be making the salt dough. Last week, we learned how to plan for our beetles, and we created a drawing, and then this week, I'm going to be showing you how to actually make the salt dough. So a couple of things. In the video, I tell you that I was planning to bake mine for about 1 hour, and it ended up being about an hour and a half by the time it was done. I checked on it after an hour, and the dough just wasn't quite ready yet. It was still kind of soft. You want it to be like rock hard. And so you might have to bake your project a little bit longer than an hour, depending on how big you sculpt. If you have a larger sculpture, I mean, mine are pretty good size. So if you have a larger sculpture, it might take close to 2 hours to bake it because you want to bake it kind of slow and keep it at that 275-degree heat, okay? If you have a smaller sculpture, it might not take quite as much time. So it just really depends on how you sculpt and what you do today. So I just wanted to cover that really quick. Just a reminder, we were inspired by the art of Christopher Marley and his Beetles, and I hope you guys enjoyed seeing his art and what he does and what he creates, and I'm so excited to see what you guys come up with. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the video today because it is kind of time consuming, and so I hope that you watch all the way through to the end so you know what every step is, and I hope you have fun. So to make our salt dough, you will need a half a cup of salt, and I just used regular table salt. You can get this anywhere. It's really cheap, so just a half a cup of regular table salt. You will need 1 cup of flour, just regular flour. I just buy the cheap stuff for projects like this. And then you'll need 1 1/4 cup of hot water. It should be as close to boiling as you can get it. So I just took this container of water and I microwaved it for a couple of minutes, and so it's really hot. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm just gonna take my 1 cup of flour, I'm gonna put it in my bowl. Okay, I'm gonna take my half a cup of salt, add that to the flour. I'm actually going to take my flour and I'm going to put just a little bit more in this cup just in case. There we go. I'm going to set that aside just in case my dough is just a little bit too wet. Okay, so now I'm just going to add the really hot water. And I'm going to stir. I'm going to use a fork just so that way I can get like most of the chunks out. You obviously don't want to use your hands because the water is really hot. It does cool pretty quickly. So I'm just going to kind of tilt my bowl towards me so I can kind of see what's happening. I can tell right now that this is probably just a little bit too wet. It's just not quite the consistency of clay, which is kind of what we're going for. So I can stir it just a little bit more, but I think I am going to have to take just a little bit of flour. I'm not going to dump all of this in. I'm just going to kind of sprinkle a little extra flour on the top. And then I'm going to sprinkle just a little extra salt on the top of that. And then I'm going to continue to stir. Oh yeah, that's gonna be better. I need to add just a tiny bit more flour. I don't want it to be so sticky where it's just gonna be sticking to my hands the whole time I'm trying to sculpt, because that's going to be really difficult to manage. So I'm just going to sprinkle a tiny bit more. Tiny bit more salt. and then stir. There we go. That's probably pretty good. So I'm gonna let this cool for just a second because I don't want to burn my hands on the hot water. So I'm gonna let it cool for just a second. Then I can start sculpting with it right away. Okay, so now that my dough is cooled off, it's still a little warm, but I'm not gonna hurt myself if I touch it. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start dividing it up into smaller sections because I'm probably not going to need all of this dough for my beetle. And so I can actually save it. So if you have extra dough left over and you feel like you might wanna do another sculpture on another day or maybe even later in the day, you can put this in a Ziploc bag and just make sure you squeeze all of the air out of the Ziploc bag and you can save the dough to sculpt another time. So I'm just gonna start off with a piece that's about this big. And again, this was my plan. This was my design. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start off by sculpting the shape of the body. And remember, in sculpture, we want it to look 3D. So, and actually this might be a little bit too big. I kind of want this to be like a little bug that I might paint really bright colors and stick it inside one of my plants or something like that in my garden. So again, I'm gonna kind of start shaping it to match the design that I had. So it was kind of flat up here. That looks pretty good. I kind of flatten them out just a little bit. All right, next I'm going to make the part of the body that connects. It's kind of like his neck, I guess. There's probably a scientific name for it, but I don't know what it is. It's the part that goes in between the head and the body. So again, I'm rolling another ball. I'm just gonna connect this. It's probably too big. Also, when you're working with your clay, if you decide, ooh, this is like way too sticky, you can just add just a tiny bit more flour to it, and that will help it not be so sticky. Okay, so that's probably pretty good. So I'm gonna kind of flatten that out. I'm sculpting this section right now, okay? So I can see it's kind of almost a little bit square-like. Okay, and then I'm going to sculpt the head. Again, roll a ball of clay. Stick it on to that. Yep, he's looking pretty good. All right. Now, I might actually make his body just a tiny bit bigger. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more clay to the sides here, and then I'm going to smooth it out. I say clay, the salt dough. Yeah, there we go. I like that better. So I'm just gonna kind of smooth that out. Just kind of pat it in there, smooth it out. All right, now I'm ready for his eyes. I am gonna actually sculpt the eyes of this one. I'm not gonna just wait and paint them on, because if I look on my plan that I made last week, I feel like the eyes are gonna pop out a little bit on a beetle. I feel like that's kind of an important part of a beetle. So I'm just gonna take a little extra clay, roll it into a ball. That might be too big, so take a little bit off. Roll it into a ball. There we go. That's a good size eye for a beetle. Same thing on the other side. Roll a little ball. Plop it on there. Looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm gonna start making his arms. So for that, I'm just going to, I kind of want to roll out really thin pieces of clay, but I don't want them to be so thin that they're gonna break. So I just need to be a little bit careful about this here. The salt dough is a lot more delicate and soft than regular clay, so it's not as durable. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm gonna shape that coil first, and then I'm gonna really make sure that it's like stuck on and not going anywhere. It's really stuck on the beetle. Okay, same with the other side. Really stick that on there. My fingers are getting a little bit sticky, so I'm just going to grab a little extra flour, sprinkle it on. I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit over there. There we go. Now the dough won't stick to my fingers quite as much. Okay. Same thing with his legs. I guess technically those are part of his legs. Roll a coil, break it in half, or you could roll 2 different coils if you want to. Make sure they're really stuck on there really well. Shape them the way that you want them. Now I'm gonna have to reshape this when I go to put it on the baking sheet before I put it in the oven. To make life easier for yourself, you could sculpt this right onto the baking sheet, and that way you don't have to move it around at all before you put it in the oven. I didn't do that because I'm gonna put tin foil on my sheet so it doesn't stick, and I didn't want the foil to be too shiny for my video. So, but you can feel free to do that. Might make it a little easier for you, and you don't have to worry about it breaking. Okay, so for the back legs, I'm going to make these just a little bit thicker towards the body of the beetle, and then thinner as it gets towards the foot, I guess. That would be the foot. So this is one back leg. That might be a little bit too much. So I'm just gonna, there we go. Peel that off. Okay. I'm gonna attach that on, and then again, I'll shape it. And every time I go to shape something, I'm kind of, you can't see this, but I'm glancing over at my plan so I can see the way that I have it shaped. That leg is a little bit too long, and now it's a little too short. That's all right. I'll just have to go back and kind of play with it till I like the shape of it. You can make so many different things with salt dough. I think this stuff is really fun. It's inexpensive. You don't need to spend a lot of money on clay. You can pretty much make any kind of clay project out of this stuff. It's pretty cool. Okay, it's almost like Play-Doh, except you don't add color to it until after you bake it. Okay, that's probably a little too long. So there's that, and then I'm just gonna do the antenna or pincher thingy. I don't know. Do beetles have antennas? So it's kind of like a U shape up here. All right. I'm gonna kind of curve that in a little bit. I'm pretty happy with the way he's looking. So I think he's about ready to bake. Now this is where you're gonna have to have some patience. He needs to bake in the oven for about 30 to 45 minutes until he's totally ready to be painted, and you're gonna have to wait for him to cool down before you start painting. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how I'm going to do that, and then I will be back to show you painting. All right, so now that we have sculpted our projects out of the salt dough, they are ready to be baked. You don't have to wait for the dough to dry out at all. You can just pop it right in the oven. So my 4th graders did snakes, my 5th graders did creepy crawly bugs or beetles. So I have my oven preheated to 275. Please ask for your parents' help with this. I don't want anybody to get hurt, but you do need to preheat your oven to 275. And like you can see, I lined my sheet with foil just so my sculptures don't stick to the pan. I'm just gonna go ahead and stick that in there. And I know I said earlier that it was going to take about 45 minutes to bake, but because my sculptures are a little bit thick, I want to make sure that they bake all the way through. And so I'm going to leave mine in there for about 1 hour. So 60 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and push start, and I will come back and check in on those after 60 minutes to make sure they're baked all the way through and are ready to be painted. So I will see you back in a couple. Okay, so our sculptures have been baked, and actually mine ended up taking me about close to 2 hours, about 1.5 hours to fully bake through because they were really thick. That was okay with me. I like the way that it turned out, and I think it's gonna be kind of a really cool addition to my garden. So I'm ready to start painting. Now I am going to be using acrylic paint. I realize that not everybody has acrylic paint available at their house. I just paint a lot, so I happen to have some laying around. I would recommend acrylic, but if you don't have acrylic laying around, tempera paint will work. Those little craft acrylic paints will work. Watercolor paint will work, and you could actually even color on this with Sharpie or washable marker. Now, if you do that and you use washable marker, it may not stay on. Like if you were to put this outside in the rain or water, if it gets wet, the marker may wash off. So this is my sculpture though after it's been baked, and I am ready to start painting. So just a reminder, this was my drawing from last week. This was my design plan for my sculpture. So it's not necessarily going to look exactly like this, but I'm going to use this as kind of a guide. Okay, so let's go ahead and start painting. So I have a little disposable palette here that I'm using. You can use anything for a palette, paper plate, anything like that. I realized I didn't bring any blue down, and that's okay. I can change my design, or I can pause and run up and go grab some blue, but I think I'll just stick with the colors that I have available. I think these colors will work really well together. All right, so I think what I'm gonna do first is actually paint this larger body section all orange, and then I'm going to add my other designs on top. So it's kind of like painting on a cookie or a roll. That's essentially what it is. Okay, so again, I'm just gonna do all over color, and then I'm gonna go back in and start adding designs with some of my other colors. So I'm gonna go ahead and speed up the video so that you can see my process. And I will be back to show you what the final result was in just a minute. again, 5th graders. I hope you enjoyed that video. I realize that this project is going to take a little while for you guys to do, so if you do not have time to make the dough, the salt dough, sculpt it, bake it, and paint it all in one day, that's totally understandable. So if you are not able to do that, you can break it down into smaller parts, okay? You could make the dough one day, you could sculpt it and bake it another day, and then you could paint it on a 3rd day. Or if you want to make the dough, sculpt it, bake it, and then just save the painting part for later, you could do that, okay? It doesn't all have to be done in one day. One last reminder that you may have to bake yours a little bit longer. I know I said that in the beginning of the video, but I just wanted to remind you again that it might take longer than an hour to bake yours because we want to bake it kind of slow. So email me with any questions that you have. This week's maps questions I will have posted in Google Classroom, so you can go head over there and see what it is I'm going to be asking you on Friday. So I hope you guys have a blast with this project. I cannot wait to see what kind of creepy crawlies you guys come up with and create. And as always, happy Art Day.